there are 43 students missing after a shooting by local policemen in Iguala, in the city of Iguala, in the state of Guerrero. And these students, they were politically involved in their communities, and so that makes us think this is political. You were speaking about the drug dealers being involved in this, and that's where we would like to intervene in the discussion, because we think this is much more complicated than that. You have to understand the state of the Guerrero, how there's guerrilla going on, for example, on one side, and there's also paramilitaries, people like civilians trained, financed, and organized by the military, who are also involved in what ends up being the government in this type of places. And so it's really complicated what happened there. We assume this is political, and we want these students to appear again.
And Valeria Hamel, could you talk about these rural schools and the conflicts that they often have with local authorities, the history of conflicts with some of them?
Yes, sure. This school in particular, there are teachers' colleges, rural teachers' colleges, where students come from like peasant families and villages around the area, really like rather poor people who go here to be teachers because it gives them a stable job opportunity. And these are kids who are good at school and they want to teach their communities. Most of them get also taught to be bilingual teachers, both indigenous and Spanish teachers, which is also really interesting how this works. And these schools, they are really politically organized. They have been so for many, many years. One of the main leaders of the 70s guerrilla war between the government and the rural areas came from the school. And since then, they've been really organized. There's a big federation of these schools who claim that they're socialists, and they are also really they do extreme measures in their way of doing politics, because they have been pushed to that, because they come from really difficult communities. The government is constantly trying to criminalize them, is constantly trying to take away the funds of these schools. In 2011, 2 students from the same school were murdered by policemen. So these students, their reaction is to fight back somehow, and to also teach in their schools political knowledge. Not only do they become teachers, but they become also like social fighters.
The political history, the social history of these schools is really significant for 20th century Mexico. They stem from the social reforms implemented in the 1930s that resulted from the revolution that took place between 1910 and 1920, and were one of the few avenues where peasants could have an education. And so they were, in one sense, validating the agrarian experience, because at these schools, students were also taught or are encouraged to cultivate the land and have all sorts of cooperative projects, while at the same time receiving an education. And so for decades, these schools have sought to preserve the spirit of these social reforms. And after the 1930s, after President Lázaro Cárdenas left office, they have been, as Valeria already noted, either abandoned or outwardly attacked. So to the extent that they are radical hubs of political organizing, I think must be understood, and to the extent to which the state has abandoned its commitment to education, a commitment that under the Constitution it's supposed to have. And these rural normales constitute part of that larger social program of public education and commitment to the countryside.
And Professor Padilla, the question of the proliferation of these drug cartels and gangs in not only the north of Mexico but in other rural areas of Mexico, and the impact that that's had on these conflicts with students.
Yeah, so I think these last attacks, these latest attacks, which again are not a new attack on normales rurales, they have been criminalized for decades, are basically the logical culmination of, on the one hand, the criminalization of these schools, in which their students are constantly seen not as students but as political agitators. Sometimes that's the best case. Sometimes they're just seen as people or kids who just want to destroy public property and or sabotage sabotage the social order, who are not committed to studying. That's the way they're portrayed in the media. So the fact that this creates a narrative under which they can be attacked by impunity, whether it be the government or whether it be criminal organization. So this particular attack, I think, reflects that logical culmination of the decades of criminalization of these schools and a situation in which the current Mexican government, it's really hard to tell where the state begins and where drug cartels end.
And the role of police?
The role of police here is very significant. Again, historically, when students mount any sort of social mobilization here to just demand simple things like food for these schools, an increase in scholarships, the protection of the infrastructure for these schools, they're instantly seen as criminals, and the police is then charged with attacking them. And in this last, or containing their mobilization, which often involves attacking them, in this particular mobilization, it's really significant to see that it was the police who first shot at them, the police who first detained these students and took them, and then it looks like handed them over to a criminal organization.
Do you believe the students are still alive?
It's very hard to tell. Honestly, the fact that the DNA showed that they were not those in this mass grave, to a certain extent, gives us hope. On the other hand, just the sheer amount of days that have now passed and not turning up, to me, points to a bit of a tragic end. Not to mention, just in the whole context of this is what, unfortunately, is now becoming the norm in Mexico: mass graves, assassinations. For a long time, political analysts have warned that the militarization of the drug war has been targeting social activists, not just the drug cartel.